Hey, friends. Our motto for ELA this year is grounded in science, driven by intent, and designed for impact. So, I'm going to walk through the intentional design of the research routine and some of the instructional choices that I made with the students in mind that I was teaching in the model class. So, the model class that you see was made up of any kid that I could get my hands on this summer. So it was a lot of friends and employees, children of employees, teachers' kids, they always get volunteer to do this kind of thing. And so they range from rising fifth grade through seniors that have just graduated. So we had a large range of ages, which you wouldn't typically see in a classroom, but it really mimicked the ability level. So I had a wide range of ability level in what they were bringing to the table, which is what happens in your classrooms. Pretty authentic in that way. So, starting with day one, our day one routine, it was notice and wonder and compare and contrast in our focus phrase. So, when I look at the research, some of the research that supported that was summarizing, note taking questions, and similarities and differences. And those range in effect size. If we're looking at Hattie's effect size and his meta analysis of research, it ranges from 0.68 to 1.70. So pretty, especially those similarities and differences, as a really high effect size. Kids were note taking, they were summarizing in their own words what they noticed and wondered. They also used their own background knowledge. So you saw this is an activity in math that a lot of times I call it low floor, high ceilings because there's lots of entry points. And so when kids are bringing their own background knowledge to the table, it's a 0.93 effect size, has a really big impact. And so we know that kids aren't coming in with blank slates. One example I can think off the top of my head is Cohen noticed the point of view of the sentence, that the I represented the point of view. So obviously that was something that one of his amazing teachers along the way really emphasized with him. So I thought that was a great observation. But I really think that beginning day, the purpose, or two of the things are really noticing the craft of the sentence, but it's a time for you also to get to know what kids are bringing to the table and what background knowledge that they're bringing. Something else on that day is we are allowing kids to really engage. We're making it a smaller window. So, kids, when they're reading and they're trying to comprehend a whole text, it's a lot of information. So, they get cognitive overload, right? They're not paying attention to maybe the craft of a sentence. So, by isolating that one or two sentences, it's that smaller window so they can really analyze it. In addition, that's where I my explicit direct instruction happens, and it doesn't sound like a lecture, right? I'm using the academic vocabulary of pronouns and nouns and subjects all in the teaching that I'm doing, but using mentor sentences. So day two, again, we look back at the mentor sentences, the research behind mentor sentence. Marchetti and Odell write a lot about the impact of using those mentor sentences. And then that's also where I'm doing a little bit of modeling in my think aloud. So I modeled with my own sentence and I identified my Cohen was the subject, the noun, and then the pronoun. And so it talked through how they aligned and why I chose the words that I did. Something else on that day, that is the day that I let them use their whiteboards. So hopefully you see that in the video or hear me talking about using their whiteboards. So I just use the individual. I have like little paddle whiteboards in my classrooms. I in my classroom when I was teaching ELA, I just had little, personal whiteboards that we use quite frequently. So the reason Peter Liedl, who actually wrote a book about math when I was doing math intervention, Peter Liedl writes about the use of whiteboards and how that increases engagement because it reduces or it increases their risk taking. Because it's not permanent and because they can erase, they're more likely to do some of that revision work that we want them to do. because they can erase pretty easily versus on paper. And so he writes a lot about that. It's a very interesting. They do vertical whiteboards in his book, and it's creating thinking math classrooms, which are vertical non-permanent surfaces. So essentially like a whiteboard, and each team works on the whiteboard. So that's another way that you could utilize some of that information or some of that research. On day 3, the research that supported that model was cooperative learning, and that has a 0.78 effect size. And then also sentence combining. So if you read any books around, or the research in Writing Next talks a lot about sentence combining as one of the most effective practices, one of the 11 most effective practices for improving student writing. But also that's cited in the research on What Works Clearinghouse, and then also in Jeff Anderson's books around revisions decisions, mechanically inclined. So there's lots of writing around sentence combining, which was a focus of day 3. I chose because these were students that I didn't know. These were kids, any kids that we could get together. So I didn't know what background they were going to bring to the table as far as like their ability to revise a sentence. And so I wanted to take them from the concrete to the abstract. So I cut up those individual sentences, and I let them play around with it and physically move, delete, add, and do that draft process physically. That also increased collaboration. So I think at the beginning of the year, and this is one of the reasons why I chose it as well, is because these kids didn't know each other. And so in order to really increase that collaboration where they're talking through the decisions and why they're doing what they're doing, adding that physical collaboration was really helpful. So it was very simple. One goal, it was create a sentence with these cut up words that were from those 3 sentences that are on the side, and use the draft process. So they could delete words, they could add words, they could rearrange them. And sometimes that is going from the concrete, that physical manipulation of words, to the abstract. And so that helped me see what kids maybe even need that scaffold. There are a couple groups, some of our older kids, that probably could have gone straight to either doing it on the whiteboard or doing it on paper. So that's what I think about when I think about these scaffolds for grammar instruction, is maybe they need that concrete manipulation, so on paper, or then I could go to whiteboard, because again, risk taking, and then go to paper. So that was why I chose to do that. And again, there's a lot of research around scaffolding, and then Bruner writes about the progression from concrete to abstract, and how we have to make those decisions as instructional leaders to move kids along the levels of abstraction. Then in day 4, we have reciprocal teaching. So that's when they were revising their own mentor sentences. So they were combining, or they were revising their own sentence from their writing. And so reciprocal teaching comes into place because they're sharing their sentence in the revisions that they made, thinking about their focus phrase. And so that's how that reciprocal teaching, that's from What Works Clearinghouse with a 0.74 effect size. And then revision, the idea of revision where we're going back, is really tricky for kids. It is one of our standards, and lots of people write about it, but Jeff Anderson writes a lot about doing that revision. How do we help kids revise and be thinking about the reader and the impact in the reader? Day 5 is really where I was looking at transfer. And so your CFUs that are built into the slides, into our grammar routine, have 2 parts. I only did the second part, again, because this was a new group. I really wanted to see what they could do as far as transferring what they learned into that multiple choice format. But that's the day of transfer. So part 1 on the CFU is to use the mentor sentence and then to write. So they write using the convention, the pronoun antecedent convention in this instance, and then and so they're using the mentor sentence to write their sentence that has the correct pronoun and antecedent. Then part two are the three multiple choice questions. So all of your CFUs are written in that format where it's an authentic way to really assess kind of their thinking and what they can apply to writing. But then also, what does that look like as far as transferring a multiple choice test? Because depending on the grade level that you're teaching, but grades 6 through 8 and then English 2 will have some of those grammar questions. And we don't do a lot of them, so we don't need to, inundate them with multiple choice questions. But it is important for us to talk through what those types of questions could look like on an assessment like that, on a standardized test. And again, they look a little bit different when you get up into ACT, SAT, those types of questions. So I did it out loud and I did it on the whiteboard to see. One, I had them turn it all at the same time so I could see who was getting it and who was not. But the other part was we did it together so I could do immediate feedback, because again, this is the first time I've ever done this with these kids. Now, maybe after the third week, I might have them go ahead and do the Google form. So I have that feedback. Or maybe I have a rowdy group. This is a very good, tame kind of, but maybe I have a rowdy group and I need them to do the Google form because I can't keep my observations. I want to know where everyone is. And maybe then immediately after I go through it, because we went through the multiple choice question, the first one. I think maybe one or two kids, I think it was two kids, got the correct answer. So I knew immediately I had to do some reteaching. I did some reteaching with one question because, again, they weren't reading closely, and they were confused with the it's and who it was aligned to. So I needed to do some reteaching of how we read the sentence, what the question is asking us. So one test taking strategy, one mini reteach on the concept that we've been working on, and then question 2, all but one person got it right, and then question 3, they all got it correct. And so again, just a little bit of immediate feedback helped them be successful on the other 2 questions. And so that immediate feedback, again, when we talk about the effect size of feedback, is a 0.66, and timely is a big part of that. Then also, in addition, test prep is a 0.30 effect size. So again, I don't think test prep shouldn't be all of what we do, right? But if we can integrate it in smaller chunks, that's the most effective way that for kids to learn it. But we also are teaching them specific test taking strategies and what the authentic way, like I said to the kids, we've been living like writers in the authentic way that writers write. But today we're going to look at what that looks like in your test. And that's an important strategy to learn as well. During that time, I was collecting observations for me to think through who needs some reteaching, what do they need reteaching on. So one of the students, it was the mentor sentence day where they were supposed to revise one of the sentences, and they didn't exactly understand that I'm looking for them to use the pronouns, right? And so that might be some reteaching, and that might be a small group, especially when you first start the routine. Kids, and we want to celebrate. If the kid wrote a complete sentence, which he did, we're going to celebrate that. But then we also want you to practice this skill. So let's try it again in a small group. So I can see if you've mastered that skill in your own writing. So ask them to bring a piece of writing to the table. It could be their quick write again. And maybe you find the sentence for them that you want them to revise to see if they can use that convention. All right. So in general, the routine, some more research, repetition and practice has an effect size of 1.26 to 1.58. So they were able to practice this convention multiple times throughout the week. So 5 days, they practice that convention, and then space practice because they're doing a little bit each day instead of doing that routine all in one day. Although my kids did for the model classroom, the way that the routine is written is that it's spaced out. So it has an effect size of 0.65, that space practice. And then thinking about the the design overall, that there are multiple exposures over time, that they're broken down into small chunks. Like I said at the beginning, that one sentence, that really aligns with Piaget's work around schema development, right? We're giving them one small chunk, and it also aligns with some more recent research around cognitive overload. But we start with a small chunk and we build and we build and we build and we build. Um, Another thing that I think that you can kind of see, and I'll talk a little bit more about, is success breeds success. There's a lot of research, especially around reading, the Matthew effect. With reading, the better reader you are, the better reader you become, right? The more you read, the better reader you become. But if you're a weaker reader, then you don't read, and then you become, you don't grow, right? It's just like working out. Like if I'm not going to work out, I'm not going to get stronger. So it makes sense, but the success that you feel helps you want to continue, you know? And so we saw a lot of that. The low ceiling, or the low floor, high ceilings really helped us develop that success, because every kid felt like they had an entry point. Every kid was able to engage. And so that has a 0.71, the self efficacy has a 0.71 effect size, which is really big. And again, I didn't go into the research on motivation, but it really does impact motivation and engagement, true cognitive engagement. And then in general, throughout the routine, and this is more you would see in the video, not so much in the script, is that the vocabulary. So I did try to make sure that I use the vocabulary of, especially pronoun. I didn't use antecedent always, because they didn't really need to know what that word was. That's what it's written in our grammar matrix. But they did need to know that word that pronoun needed to align with the noun before it, or the noun it was referring to. And so I used noun and subject as some of that academic vocabulary. And so that has a 0.63 effect size, integrating that academic vocabulary in all of those different ways. So they wrote about it, they read about it, they talked about it, they listened, right? All four of the ways. And so again, that has a pretty high effect size. Not memorizing it, not writing the definition, those don't have those high effect sizes. So we're grounded in science. You saw that every part of the routine is grounded in science. The instructional moves that I made, so driven by intent. So I made instructional moves like the choice of the whiteboard and the choice of the sentence strips. Those were specific to my kids and where they were coming at that point in the year, which was new. They've never talked to each other before. Now my routine, those intentional choices change as I gather observations, and as I get to know my students. And then design for impact. So as far as the impact goes, again, like I said, the CFU, when kids got, after that immediate feedback, kids got to their third question, they all got it correct. But the best impact I had was afterwards, I kind of asked them, informally, what is something that I need to think about? What are things that you want teachers to know? And they said they liked it. They enjoyed it. My daughter, after she had time to process, was like, I learned something today. And she was like, and I'm a graduate student. And I told her this was a 6th grade standard. And so she was like, it was really interesting because she learned something new, right? And so I think that speaks, that the fact that kids were engaged and they liked it and they felt successful. One of the kids said, "We've been doing this for an hour. It didn't feel like it." And again, you're gonna break this up into 10-minute chunks, but I just think it speaks it speaks volumes about how it engages students, and that's the impact that we want, because that's the impact that's what's going to have an impact on their lifelong learning. Having that motivation and engagement. The last thing I want to say is you may see in between, at the end of each day, I had kids stand up and celebrate. And if you remember, if you were with us last year, we did a lot of research and talked a lot about movement. And so anytime a kid just stands up, that's increasing oxygen to the brain, and that helps with retention, it helps with engagement, it helps kids learn, because the oxygen is flowing in the brain. And then the other thing is celebration. And so celebrations release dopamine. So kids are coming back from summer and they're getting all kinds of dopamine because they're on their phones or on games all the time, right? And so it's really hard to transition from that environment to a school environment where they're not getting constant dopamine. And this is one of the ways that you can authentically integrate it into your lesson. It's a quick little celebration. Now, some of them felt a little like the older kids were felt a little bit silly at first, but again, once you build that culture and community, that I think that you'll enjoy it. My daughter talked about her AP class, and it was also her English 4 teacher, and that she did a great job of creating community in those classes. She's like, we would have had a blast with that, even though we were seniors. Like, we would have had a blast doing a celebration in there. So I don't think it was age, I think it was just that it was new in this new environment. And once you create that culture and community, and I think explain the brain science to kids, let them know, like, this is food for your brain. This is going to make your brain happy, right? It's important that we know that as teachers, but it's also good for kids to know as they think about making those choices when they go to college, right? Maybe they have to figure out, like, the Starbucks is their little dopamine hit to get them to the next class. All right, friends. Thank you for listening to the research behind each part of this process. And remember, grounded in science, driven by intent, and designed for impact.